All right, thanks for joining this new session, 3CLogic Fireside Chat. We have with me today a couple very special guests. First and foremost, no special order, Chris Brown, who leads the customer service management team for ServiceNow, specifically in the MedSLED space, so state, local, higher education, as well as medical healthcare. And also Andrea Pohlman from Accelare, who is the VP and general manager of services over there. Chris, Andrea, great to have you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be here.
Of course. So look, in the spirit of a fireside chat, let's just dive right in. Obviously, 2020 is one for the record books. That goes without saying. But one of the things that we wanted to talk about, and obviously your area of specialty for the both of you, was to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID and this whole year with regards to sort of the public sector, state, local governments, and obviously, Chris, that's your area of expertise. I was curious, just to kind of kick the conversation, tell me a little bit about some of the trends, some of the outcomes that have come out of everything that's transpired this year, and then maybe we can eventually dive into a little bit in terms of what that means for years to follow.
Sure. Well, I don't think it's any surprise for any of us here as constituents in our communities that COVID has driven everything. And I know we get tired of thinking about COVID, but it certainly exposed pretty quickly how I guess unprepared we are in being able to handle massive volumes of a single type of inquiry, right? So all of the people that are applying for unemployment insurance, all of the people that want to know where they can get testing and tracing, all of the people that need to know, are my kids going to school in person or are they staying home? Everything in just massive volumes. It basically shined a light on a lack of preparedness that we've seen over the years again and again, trying to buy products or trying to modernize or trying to transform. And there's still a lot of siloed legacy systems that are out there. So our ability or inability to seamlessly, I'm actually going to say that I'm very impressed with many of our organizations and state and local, as well as higher ed and K through 12, our ability to go virtual. I think we surprised ourselves, everybody working remotely, how quickly we were able to adapt to that. So kudos in that aspect of it. Our lives will be changed forever in terms of having to go in person places. But it definitely exposed all of the areas where we were not prepared. Not even speaking to the kind of experiences that, in a quiet world, we would have aspired to. Andrea, you and I talk about it often, about the consumer experience, right? What citizens really would like to have. And we stepped it way back, this year. COVID really exposed that, hey, consumer experience, great, but how about let's just be prepared for all of the people that we need to serve.
I couldn't agree more. Some of the things that I run into is, in cities and in states, transformation meant getting the staff laptops. And so that has been really an eye-opening experience as well. But when we think about consumerizing for that citizen, that's no small task. And there are all kinds of socioeconomic considerations that have to be taken into account. Folks that need to everything from file for unemployment, as you had said, Chris, to making sure that they have assistance in getting food. That used to be an in-person endeavor. And knowing that many of those constituents don't have laptops, what they do have are phones, burner phones, other kinds of, all of the different kinds of carriers and phones, etc. How do you make sure that you're delivering to all of your constituents that experience, regardless of their, again, socioeconomic standing in your community? It's been a really interesting phenomenon to watch cities, governments take on that challenge.
Well, and think about it too in terms of the policies that are in place, right? So not just the technology that we may or may not have available to us, But think about the policies on attestation, right? You come into person to show that you are who you are and that your circumstance either qualifies or you're eligible for a benefit. And you think about in a shutdown state, how do you even get to the places that now their doors are shut down, right? And you can't just all go into a lobby and wait. So, I mean, the policies, it really showed us a lot in terms of just having to experience and understand what this new world would be when you can't just all show up.
Well, and good luck getting a word in edgewise at this point, because it just, it kind of tells, you know, a great use case, Chris, is that we actually installed a video attestation on the ServiceNow platform using CSM. It was for unemployment insurance in a particular state, where they, again, the policy was you had to be there in person to apply.
We had to wait for them to relax the policy from the feds to even be able to adopt the technology. The technology was there and prepared and ready to go. And the feds' rule about being in person didn't allow for it until they did an emergency relieving of that policy so that people could video attest, right, that they are who they are.
Yeah, so it's remarkable, innovation, if you will, that overnight we had to make sure that states were accommodating for that and able to attach those attestations to cases so that in the future you could go back, make sure that that person was the person that was getting the benefits. So those are just some of the really incredible things that we've been able to do very quickly for government. It's been interesting how there's a perception that government moves slowly, and sometimes they do, but the speed at which they have had to not only put in solutions, but then adopt them as cultures that, are traditionally change adverse has been really another piece of that holistic implementation of these solutions that has taken care in feeding as well.
Absolutely.
So I mean, we could talk about this for hours, and I think you guys hit on a bunch of really interesting things. So number one, you're right, Andrea. I mean, there's sort of this preconceived notion that government is always going to move slowly or more slowly than, say, their commercial sector. But to your point, Chris, citizens don't necessarily differentiate between their state services and the companies that they do business with. They would, in a perfect world, expect the same experience. Right. And so the expectations are, well, you might argue within state and local might be elevated, especially when you look at COVID, because, getting your unemployment check, is going to be something that's going to hit home a lot closer than maybe, your order being late from Amazon, right? Or something of that nature. But you also hit on something else that obviously would explain why sometimes government is forced to move slowly, which is regulatory hurdles, like the fact that, until COVID, you have to come in to do certain tasks. You want to get your passport picture at some point. I know for my kids, I had to go in and physically show the kids and sign and all that good stuff. I'm kind of curious though, because you alluded to the fact that required a change in policy, and some of those policies change quickly. But that also speaks to the most important aspect, which is this whole communication layer, right? The whole idea of omni-channel. What can you do in person? What do you have to do through a call center? What can you do through digital channels, or completely avoid and do self-service or a knowledge base? I know, we within our business, and we specialize in call centers, we saw call volumes go through the roof for some of our public institutions. And yes, we helped there, but then that also revealed opportunities for automation, where you could deflect and take some of that load off and reduce hold times. What do you see being the trend with that in mind, using obviously ServiceNow, the platform, what you specialize in? What are you suggesting to people to try and long-term address that issue for the next pandemic or pandemic-like crisis?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to be obviously a number of things, right? You're going to have to continue to work on those legacy systems, or at least get them so that they are, some modernization on the front end of it, so that your intake, so that your communication channel, your actual one-to-one relationship with your constituent, your parents of students, or whomever, right? You have to be able to communicate quickly with them. And so kind of back to that consumer-like experience you were talking about, Andrea, I would have said, and I have this argument with my team all the time, is there ever going to be a day when we have the city of Colleyville, which is where I'm at, the 311 app or the city of Colleyville app on my phone? My answer today would be like, I mean, what, maybe not. What is there? Maybe now during election period time, it's interesting to me because I want to see what the wait times are on a particular polling station, so that I know when I'm going to leave and go and cast my vote, that I can choose one that is, got the shortest wait times. But there hadn't been, you think of 311, it's there, I got a loose dog, and our hearts are, that's probably where I'm most interested. Is I want to very quickly, take the picture of the dog in the corner of where I saw it and let people know of that. But next door, that's what I do that with, right? So I think that to the effect that we can make that communication layer more readily available, I would like to see the K through 12s taking on an app that's downloaded potentially for the tracing tracking, right? Can my kid come to school today? Can any of our kids come to school today, right? That immediate communication and doing that across a device that we all have, or for the most part, the majority of us have, that's got to be, I think, where we focus our time. And how you get there from here depends on your maturity and kind of where you are in your transformation. But I would anticipate that the projects that are going to get you to the closest one-to-one broad communication to the masses is going to need to be where we spend our time and focus. And that will be ongoing. So 311 was kind of a nice to have. That it obviously goes into a lot of different loopholes that transact back at the county level, city level, state level. So it's a myriad of things, but to the effect that they can make that work well for constituents, that's what we need.
Right.
Yeah, we've been really interestingly delivering not so many apps as the ability to go online, go to a site like a 311 or a city site, and having that app-like experience on your phone without having to get the app. And
right.
So that has
and
been—
I mean synonymously and kind of interchangeably for somebody who understands that. Obviously for you, there's a big difference between those two things. I really just mean, again, the ability to have a web-like experience, but transparency and information at your fingertips is what you want.
Well, we did, interestingly enough, an implementation for a large metropolitan city who was hosting a Super Bowl. And at the same time, their hearing and speech impaired communities came forth saying they needed a much more inclusive way to communicate with the city. And so the notion of texting to that city's 311 came up. And so essentially what happened was we set up very quickly a knowledge base with a keyword search that quickly, here are your top 3 articles. Does that fit your need? If not, open a case right through your phone.
Right.
And it was an unanticipated benefit in that not only were the hearing and speech impaired communities supported through that, but they had this explosion of this 50 and over crowd, because that's how they communicated with their families, their grandkids, as well as that Gen insert letter here crowd, right, because this is the way we communicate. And so all of a sudden, this little option that they were putting on gas pumps, on bus stops, saying, here, you can text to 311, exploded in popularity. And it really took this notion of shift left to heart, that high cost, high touch transaction, where you've got a team of customer support or constituent support folks on standby, to a pennies on the dollar kind of model, where the knowledge is getting pushed out like that. The response time was 3 seconds. and it was pushed out in 12 different languages. Amazing, you know, and quick.
QR codes are our friends. You know, that's just, we've got a restaurant down the street now that because they're not putting any menus up because they don't want to be the cleaning, the whole thing. They have a little tile on the table that's a QR code. Take a picture of it and there's your menu right in your hands. I mean, think of all of the ways, like you said, that you can just really quickly, you know, get out information by driving people to the right place.
I think you're hitting on a really important theme, is that when people think about digital transformation, they think of a massive overhaul, right?
Right.
But you talked earlier, Chris, you know, I mean, yes, we got to move away from legacy systems, et cetera, but you're not just going to flip a switch and have that happen overnight. And yet what COVID did is drive an immediate demand for quick wins, right? And to your point, Andrea, what was underestimated is how some of those quick wins can lead to huge ROI. I know, for example, password reset requests. Can you automate those? Whether someone calls in, you know, or so forth, or contact tracing, or sending up alerts and notifications proactively if people are inundating the call center to get them to realize you're calling about something that's already known, but then tag them to the same parent case and automatically have them part of that SMS alert to let them know when that's been resolved. So they don't have to wonder, do I need to call back? Has it been fixed since? And it's all about, we talk about collaboration in the back office, but you're almost collaborating with your end customer, right? It's not, when we talk about setting customer expectations, setting citizen expectations, right? So one, making the information readily available, but then also keeping them readily informed. And that's been the big theme. I mean, let's be honest, one of the biggest frustrations about this pandemic has been just I wouldn't say disinformation, but the fact that the information has been a little bit from everywhere. No one really agrees on, you know, where you should be getting information, or is there a consistent place you should be looking for it? If you amplify that to just any department within state, local, and so forth, that's sometimes the hardest place or hardest thing to solve, is where do I find this, right? And simplifying those touch points, and then making sure that people only really, for example, call. And you're right, Andrea, the goal is to reduce, you know, those expensive resources so that they're only used when all other options have been exhausted, right? But that means that you've, you know, put together all those quick wins, which together you might all of a sudden look back and say, wow, we did digitally transform. I mean, do you guys agree?
Well, absolutely. Look, if we took the word transformation, which gets so overused, I think that the theme going forward is really not so much transformation, but transparency. Because think about transparency. If you're communicating in a transparent way, you're posting the information in a place that people can go and find it. You're then getting the transparency back from all of us, right? I mean, it's a two-way street. Transparency is both sides. You can draw your own conclusions. Let's just all be transparent about where we find things, where we go, what's going to be the response to that, and how do we move forward. So, you know, if you looked at your transformational goals and you kept transparency at the front of that, I think it would help you navigate and guide where you need to set your priorities.
And that transparency would be obviously with the end customers, but also you're talking about transparency in the back office, right? Making sure that the information is as easily accessible to the people that need to then help your citizens, right? Someone I spoke with on a previous Fireside chat said, yeah, one of the things that we do a really good job of is fixing the messy middle.
Right.
And I love that term, because it's like, you're right. I mean, in the background, it sometimes looks like everything is going in 15 different directions. So
unfortunately, what you can't see is the full life cycle of a single, you know, we call it case, incident, request, right? Without having that ability to travel along with what's going on in the background, you know, there's obviously now power in that transparency of which place is that in the workflow caught and slowed down, and where can we make that go faster? But you've got to break down the silos internally to be able to do that. So again, I think transparency.
One of the things I would throw in is that as you become more digitally transparent, if you will, you know, organizations need to start thinking about what that means to the workforce that's supporting it. So when you think about those tier 1 calls, you're giving that information to whoever's seeking it, those tier 1 calls go away. Because you know what, how to reset a password, as an example, I can figure that out digitally, and I don't need to call anybody for that information. What's coming over the bow at your organization are those more complex questions that, how do you skill up, how do you skill up that tier 1 staff to handle those more complex kinds of constituent or customer challenges, or is it an opportunity either to reskill, or is it an opportunity to redirect your organization in different ways? And so I've found that organizations aren't necessarily thinking through what that digital transparency or transformation means to their workforce. And it can mean great things. It can be upward mobility. It can be impacts to bottom line, or a combination of them.
Yep.
So final thoughts. We'll start with you, Andrea. What does 2022 look like? I mean, if you had to be, and we won't hold it to you, but if you had a crystal ball, what are the hot topics within the state and local industries? What should they be focusing on, or do you think they're going to be primarily focusing on when it comes to whatever they've taken away from the impact of 2020?
Well, I think this idea about back to work is a total transformation in and of itself. And we're using that word a lot, and I'm sorry about that. But what I would say is back to work is very different in that it may not be back to work in the traditional sense of, you know what, I am back at the state house and I'm sitting at my desk. And so how do you accommodate for that? And so I think that those kinds of concerns are going to be pushing. I think everybody thinks, well, I'll be back in the office, but that may not be what back to work ultimately looks like. And how do you ensure that you're delivering an experience that your employees can ultimately translate to that end constituent or customer? And so I think that's going to be a big trick in 2021. And I think that change is going to be on the top of everybody's mind. And how do you manage change? How do you continue to make sure that your workforces and your citizens, your constituents, are absorbing the change at a pace that you can continue to get adoption?
Yep.
Right.
Chris, final thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say that I think that it's going to be continued collaboration among the different agencies and at the state levels and the city levels, and then among, obviously schools, K through 12, everyone. I think that the legacy systems that you have, as long as they're getting the job done, and maybe they're systems of record, and that's okay, it's going to be that now let's make sure that under the covers and amongst us, we are communicating openly again. And being able to collaborate on that information that's so critical for all of us. Because if there's a call out in the future that says, hey, today nobody's going to work, or whatever you need to do to isolate, in order to be able to isolate and communicate, you're going to have cross agency collaboration, right? In a more powerful way than we've had before. So I think, CIO as a broker, I know there's a lot of folks that don't like that term, but that shared service model where you really are looking at, I am sharing my services among these agencies so that we can have that, communication to the constituents and behind the scenes to ourselves. We have to be able to anticipate what the next big backlog is going to be, and then be able to shift those resources. And to your point, Andrea, be able to collaborate that blended in the spirit of handling whatever crisis is at our fingertips, or even operating procedures at our fingertips. We got to be able to shift our people to be able to answer in that specific area. So I think it's cross-agency, collaboration.
Yep. Plan for the unexpected and use that to help sort of spread the load. That makes a ton of sense. Look, you guys are awesome. I'm sure the audience may have some questions. If you do, by all means, feel free to add some comments to today's postings. And I'm sure Chris or Andrea would be happy to answer any questions you might have. Again, this is another 3CLogic Fireside Chat. We'll have more like this one, but thanks for attending. And Chris and Andrea, really appreciate your input today.
Thanks you.
Thanks for having us. And Andrea, still my favorite.
Likewise, I'm sure.
I'll see you guys.